more musical purists? I would definitely say they are, come to think of it. In fact, thinking out loud, even more than Mikey, of course, as well.
Right.
Because Dave and Sam both, if they have a shortcoming, I mean, I love their personalities. There's so much to them. They're so interesting.
Sure.
Sammy is just your best buddy when you interview him. You just love the guy, right?
Yeah, very much so.
I was always scared to interview him because I was hoping he'd never had seen a lot of the bad things I said about him versus like on reviews of old solo albums and things like that. I was a fan of Sammy all along the solo career, but not a big fan.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it. I never loved it. I never thought he was the greatest songwriter. Obviously, he had this thing where he was straddling hard rock to the likes of a John Mellencamp or whatever, or roots rock or radio rock. So his mind was very different. He wasn't wired completely hard rock through those solo years. It never clicked with me in a huge way. There's sort of a simple aspect to it. I always call it the Sammy Hagar hanging chord syndrome,
right.
Where the chords just go down and he sings over them, and then there's a little riff, and then it goes down and he sings over them. There's a pattern to him, right?
Right.
Love his personality. Dave's personality is in a completely another orbit. I barely even know what Alex's and Eddie's personality is. I mean, I often say I just wonder what those guys do all day, right?
Yeah,
and that's what we all say. Yeah, and then the same thing with Mikey. There is the thing you do see those guys, kind of gripe at Mikey saying his mind wasn't really in it and he wasn't writing and he wasn't. So that makes Mikey, Sammy. And, Sammy's got his problems, right? I mean, we don't really see Sammy's problems, but really we can tell there's a laziness there lyrically. There's a laziness of getting to work. There's a bit of a prima donna thing,
right. Sure.
but he's way more well-adjusted than Eddie, obviously.
Well, yeah.
But sure, he's got a big ego, too.
Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to say, that's a pretty good summary of everything.
Yeah,
and yes, he definitely has an ego, too.
Yeah, but obviously we all wish Sammy would like just put a little more elbow grease into his lyrics and stuff, just try a little harder sometimes. He's almost like too much the party guy. So they all have their faults. The true story is always three sides to every story, to quote Extreme, I believe it is.
Of course.
Yes. It is funny. I mean, obviously, I think we can probably all come to the conclusion that Mikey is the guy we would most want to hang out and have a beer with. Although maybe Sammy is that guy as well. Dave, too. I mean, I don't know. All for different reasons, I suppose.
That's true. That's true.
So now, when you found out that Sam was going to join the band, what was your reaction? Did you think it was going to work? And so since then, now that he's been in and out of the band, what are your reflections on his time in the band?
I was not thrilled to see him go in there. Like I say, I had every album he ever made before that, and I liked the guy. I didn't love the guy. Something about him just didn't seem all that perfect for the role. I remember as a kid, I didn't really know or put a lot of gravity in the fact that, I almost forgot that he had more seniority over Van Halen in terms of even making a classic record with the first Montrose album. I mean, I almost put that out of my mind. Him going into the band, I just kept thinking of him as the Three Lockbox guy and Standing Hampton and all that.
Sure,
right?
sure.
And the Red and the live album and like all these albums I wasn't crazy about. I loved Danger Zone and I loved Street Machine and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Most of them I wasn't that crazy about. I like 9 on a 10 scale. So him going in, I don't recall exactly what I thought about it at the time. I remember being swept up in the excitement of it all.
Sure.
When 5150 came out, I certainly did not like that it was poppier and more keyboardy. Mm-hmm. I didn't like the new ballad thing that was introduced to the band, and I certainly hated the first song on both sides. My overall impression was that it was a lazy album. It was very underwritten. There was practically no lyrics on it. I mean, the lyrics are almost non-existent, especially Best of Both Worlds and whatever. What's the first one on the other side?
Good Enough?
Good Enough, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that is practically an instrumental with a guy like ad-libbing over it, right? And I didn't like the fast OTT song. Van Halen was never very good at those. Neither was David. I mean, they never had any power when they played fast. they broke into that fast shuffle thing, and they had high bass, and the recordings were never that bassy. So when they did fast, it never worked very well. So I wasn't crazy about Get Up. So my overall impression, I'm definitely more of a David Lee fan than a Sammy fan. I found the laziness continued. I certainly remember at the time, 1988, my frontiers are expanding. I remember there was a big Minneapolis rock thing. I loved Husker Du and Replacements and Soul Asylum.
Sure.
I loved grunge when it happened.
Right.
I loved thrash. I loved Metallica.
Right.
I loved most of hair metal.
Right.
But I found OU812 just really weak and anemic in that time, right?
Very much so.
And then you get to what I call the everybody go to Vancouver and try harder syndrome of Aerosmith and Motley Crue and Bon Jovi and Whitesnake. Everybody does it, and everybody tried harder because they were getting their asses kicked by grunge, this great new volatile, dangerous music. So Van Halen did the same thing.
Right.
Long album, originals, heavy, loved it.
Right.
For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, loved the album.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes down again. I wasn't crazy about balance, but I loved the production. I loved the Who-like chemistry of the band with Sammy. There was almost a larger amount of chemistry in a weird way with the band, because the Brown sound really started to really define itself and focus and get articulated and stay the same.
Right.
I mean, I think that sound really got going on 1984, but really defined itself on 5150, and then they kind of stuck with it. And it's a sound that comes from all of those guys together.
Right.
And I love when Sammy says, this is my favorite thing about Sammy, where he says, in kind of a faux putting my ego aside kind of thing, when he says, I did not quit that band, I was fired. I would be crazy to quit the greatest band of all time. When he says things like that, I love it, because here's a guy that he also has that kind of John Mellencamp mentality of, the famous quote about John Mellencamp about he would sell his grandmother for a hit. That kind of thing, right? So Sammy has this really good, even though he's not great at writing music, he has a really good understanding of the industry.
Right.
And I love that he recognizes that basically he was sitting in the middle of the cauldron of this hot and heavy and sweaty greatest band of all time.
Sure. But don't you think, though, that he never had the swagger, the wit, or the grit that Roth had?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his clothes were ridiculous. I mean, he had this thing where he was trying to be the adult in the room, and when you're trying to be an adult in the mid-'80s, like Rush, you can look ridiculous pretty easily, because clothes, if you're trying to look hip, and your hair and everything, in the 80s, you have this pretentious 80s look. So his look was ridiculous through the 80s. Right. Of course, he never had the swagger. Every time I want a lead singer to go in there to replace another lead singer that has a lot of stature, he has to have, we were just talking about this with Black Sabbath the other day and all the singers, right?
Sure.
When Gillan came in for Born Again, it works. It generally, people like that album even though the production's horrible, because Ian Gillan had the same stature as the rest of the guys. So Sammy comes in, he at least has this big track record behind him.
Right.
So that was cool.
Right.
But, yeah, of course, he's not going to have the swagger. He has this great voice. I love the singing. I don't like the misogyny, sort of like the locker room guy thing of Sammy Hagar. For some reason, that doesn't really match up properly with what he looks like and what I think of Sammy. And then, because at the same time, he tries to be the sensitive lover, right?
Right.
With the ballads. So all of a sudden, it doesn't quite fit. Through all that stuff with Dave did not sound as, like Dave with women, it sounds like they were all laughing together.
Right.
And with Sammy, it sounded like he was kind of putting them down a little bit.
Well, don't you think Sammy was very corporate? He kind of became like a corporate rocker in a way. Dave was always street. Dave always had a street feel. Dave still has a street feel. He's just got that vibe to him, I mean, the guy grew up in Greenwich Village, and not that he was from Greenwich Village, but he grew up, like, spending summers there and going to Cafe Wise with his Uncle Manny, and, like, he had a real interesting sort of background, whereas Sammy didn't have the same sort of background. Dave was very cultured.
But it's funny, Sammy grew up in a very broken home with an alcoholic father.
Yeah.
And he was a fighter. So Sammy had this pretty gritty background. But you're right. I mean, I think it came off corporate because the band was insanely big.
Yeah.
They had hits with power ballads. They had videos, with all the 80s tropes to them.
Right.
So that was the problem more than anything. A lot of it comes down to production too. I mean, the production of those early albums had a lot of grit, and the greater quantity of keyboards as we go on.
Yeah.
And super cheesy 80s keyboards.
Yeah.
Yeah, the early days it was crazy synths and making up sounds and like 1 foot out the door and like crazy stuff, right? But then it just got very, very, as you say, corporate when it came to the keyboards.
What do you make of Alex's drums on 5150?
I love them.
Really?
At the time I didn't, because at the time I'm thinking I'm really getting tired of 80s production, and all the reasons grunge came were good reasons, because it was sweeping away a lot of 80s tropes.
Right.
But now, as I look back, I love radical productions, and that was a radical production. And aren't they all sampled or electronic? I forget the exact.
A lot of the drums are electronic drums.
Electronic.
Yeah, we went through this in the book. I talked to Luke Corio from Australia, and he's interviewed in the book, and we talk a lot about drums, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's all electronic bass drum, I believe, is the best way to put it.
It's bizarre,
and I love that sound. Okay. Now when I look back on it, like I say, when people talk about the Brown sound, the conversation starts with Eddie and sometimes ends with Eddie, but to me, the Brown sound, and I'm a drummer too, so to me the Brown sound is more Alex than it is Eddie.
Okay, cool.
I was going to say, wasn't that Ed's original description for Al's sound, and then somehow it got adopted to Eddie's sound too?
I believe so,
Yeah.
and because Eddie has such a distinct thing he does, and his swirly stuff, and the tapping, and the playing without a rhythm track often. But really, I just find those toms and the bass drums, and even the way he uses the bell of the cymbal all the time, and the splashing and the crashing. Alex's sound is just so cool, and it is probably the most radical on 5150. I mean, I love Mine All Mine. I mean, to me, that's a masterpiece, and that's by far and away my favorite song in OU812, right?
Yeah.
But, the sound continues. It gets softened a little bit by, it's Andy Johns, right, on Lawful Carnal Knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah, it gets made a little more traditional and warm on that, and on Balance, and Free, and, a different kind of truth is a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, do you think they should have changed the band's name when Sam came in the band?
No, I think that's kind of cool. Leave it the way it is. And obviously, history has proven that, it was a good idea, because obviously they spent even, I guess, if you calculate it out, more years with Sam than Dave, I suppose.
Right.
And an equal amount of albums. So I think it's good that they kept it. No, I don't think they had to change it. They kept the members. Let's not forget, this is one of the rare cool bands where the instrumentalists have a huge personality and trademark to what they do. I mean, it's hard. It's hard even on the guitar. I mean, there are 20 or 30 people that you think of that have a distinct sound, but Eddie is way at the top of that list as a guy with a distinct sound.
Oh, yeah.
It's even harder to do that as a drummer. So, yeah, no, I'm fine with that. I loved when Black Sabbath kept the name, especially through the Ronnie years. But I remember talking to the Sabbath guys and being very excited even when they did change the band to Heaven and Hell. I thought that was kind of a cool thing that they did.
And they had no choice.
Yeah, but I thought it was an excellent, interesting name to call it Heaven.
Oh yeah,
but
definitely.
No, I'm happy with leaving it as Van Halen for sure.
Okay, all right, cool.
So Martin, here's a question that we always ask all our guests: do you view the Sam and Dave eras as two different bands, or is it the same band and they just switched singers?
I really do think they are two pretty different bands, very different bands, because number one, I've always said that the lead singer, every time everybody thinks, oh, we can just change our lead singer, I usually say, dude, the lead singer is 50, 60, 70% of the band.
Right.
And in this case, the lead singer is a strong, strong part of the band for sure.
Sure.
Because also, like most lead singers, but not every lead singer, they are the guy writing the lyrics, so that's important.
Right.
But also, for whatever reason, when they did change the lead singer, probably both lead singers had such a force of personality that they actually changed the music.